Welcome to the New Wolf Society from my side as well. Hope you guys are enjoying the time you've had here and more to come and working hard on your projects. This is a sort of a webinar where, even I was kind of thinking about the theme and, how should I do this? So I came across this thought that we are basically one of the youngest generations of the 20, not exactly the youngest, but okay, soon, close to be youngest generations of the 21st century. Why do we need an introduction to technology? I mean, like everyone knows technology. But then I kind of started wondering whether, the term technology is being molded into something else, which isn't, it's not supposed to be that. But, to make it more layman, maybe the technology term is being molded into something else, like, stuff like the latest smartphones, the tablets, the laptops. So, I mean, of course, all that's cool. Like, you get the latest gizmos and stuff and you can work around with them. But we being as engineers, I think collectively, we should still stick to the root of technology and actually look at the latest stuff happening in all sorts of different fields and term that as technology. So that's what's my agenda for today. I want to take you guys on a journey through three different fields: electronics, computer science, and mechanics plus mechatronics, and kind of show you what sort of projects are people doing around. And these projects, most of these, what I'm going to show you here, are not being implemented. They haven't been put out to the world to use and stuff, but they are the near future things. Now, you might be wondering, why would I choose a near future thing rather than something which is already being done and, tried and tested stuff? So by the time you guys graduate and, you guys finish your masters and all that stuff, many of these things might be a reality. So I want you guys to analyze by yourself and for yourself to figure out which type of field you're interested in the most. And, basically even, okay, suppose you're an electronics student, you might be wondering, okay, I'm just an electronics student. I can go anywhere in electronics and work it out. But that's not the way most of the people work, like they try to figure out fields within their field as well to focus their efforts over there. So I want to make that task easier for you by introducing you to some of the latest technologies in these three fields. So let's get started. Cool. So let's start with electronics. Now, this picture, in my opinion, defines the progress of electronics. Like if you see in this picture, whatever the dude's holding and it's put on the table, all of this has been compressed into a smartphone in your pocket. And that's what I feel defines progress in the massive amount of progress electronics made. So now I'm going to show you some other technologies, which is kind of leading this development from the front and pushing us into a new world. So the first one I'm going to be talking about is flexible electronics. Now, by term itself, you might be understanding, okay, this is some sort of an obvious tech. You can even see the picture here. But I want you guys to somewhat understand a very basic idea of how this is being done and, why isn't it a reality already? And, like people thought that, okay, twistable phones and all that might not be that hard. It should be already in our hands, but it's not, right? So let's see what does the people who are currently working on it say.
The reason computer chips are inflexible today is that they're traditional.
Can someone just tell me if the video was audible?
Yeah, it's audible.
Yes, it's audible.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, let's just watch it. 1 second. Yeah.
The reason computer chips are inflexible today is that they're traditionally made layer known as a substrate. The functional part of the computer chip, the part that does the actual computing that makes our electronics work, is just a few hundred nanometers at the surface. There just hasn't been a good way to separate the rigid substrate layer from the thin active layer on top until now.
A simple analogy would be you fry an egg on the frying pan, but then they're trying to sell the egg and the frying pan together with you. So the cost becomes really expensive, right? Here, we basically created the oil between the egg and the frying pan, which is graphene for us.
Okay, so I would like to stop here. And basically, I'm not another thing I wanted to make clear is that I'm not going to too much into depth of the workings of a technology, but I just want to give you guys a feel of what's happening around. So I'm not sure how many of you remember from your high school and 11, 12 stuff, basically science stuff, that we had studied about this carbon thing called as graphene. So let me just refresh your memories that graphene was basically a hexagonal structure, which was some sort of a layer of carbon, and there were multiple layers on top of each other which could slide over. So now what's happening here is that these guys have discovered that graphene is like a magic component for a lot of latest developments in the field. And they figured out that, the top layer, which you could see over there, the active layer, it's actually pretty flexible. But the thing is that the thing you want to keep it on is not. So now they're trying to basically build a base which is flexible along with the true chip, and kind of make it flexible enough to put it on anywhere on your skin, on your wrist. So they're trying to make the electronics truly flexible. So that's what this technology was about. And I hope you guys actually go back after the webinar and Google more about it, because this topic is actually pretty vast and you can keep exploring it throughout the day. So let's push on to the next technology. Okay, so now I want to do something interesting here. I'll be talking about a technology, but I won't be telling you what it is. I want you guys to guess the name of it in the chat once I'm done with the explanation here. So again, okay, this you can obviously see the stuff here. Again, it's about graphene. Now, graphene, as I told, is one of the most famous things happening right now in electronics. So what this technology, okay, or rather a research research topic is about is basically, as you can see at the top, this is a graphene layer. It's basically a very, this is the zoomed in part. You can see there's these multiple hexagons, the blue ones, and there's a red one is another layer below it. So these both layers are usually, they are totally along with each other. There's no difference of an angle between them, and that's how they're placed. But these researchers at a lab in MIT, what they did was that they basically rotated the layer beneath the top layer by 1.1 degrees. Now, the magic that occurred was that due to this subtle rotation, a concept of superconductivity, which I think most of you remember was, put up with stuff like semiconductors and all, and it's pretty useful in a lot of fields. Superconductivity, basically where the resistance is pretty low and, you can run current without a lot of problems and heating issues. So that kind of a property is induced just by a subtle rotation of 1.1 degrees of a layer. So that's how, this even the dude who discovered it pretty much says that it was a fluke. But this kind of a subtle rotation has started a completely different field. Now I want to show you a GIF over here, which basically shows that how the rotation happens. So if you see the top layer and the red layer are basically on top of each other, and post rotation, there's a slight difference between them. And that's basically a start of a new field in electronics. So now you might understand, the gravity of the situation, that how does a new field in any sort of technology start? Basically it's something as small as this. So now, just for fun, I just want you guys to kind of come up with names for this. Okay, I'll just put the previous slide for reference, and I want to see how close can you get. So start chucking stuff on the chat. Let's see what you guys come up with. The squid, okay, that's cool. Okay, I can't pronounce that, I guess. Ria, could you say that out loud? I don't know how to say it.
Bihexamesh.
Oh, okay, Bihexamesh. Oh, that's cool. I thought it was something else. My bad. Okay, yeah, that's cool name actually. Bihexamesh. Okay, guys, there are 32 people. Come on, just keep chucking stuff. Wave. Okay, nice, pretty cool. Anybody else? Any sort of names? Like there's a pretty cool name, and I think this is as good as the original name as well. Bihexamesh. Twisted superconductivity. Okay, that's a pretty cool guess, Parthan. Anybody else? You can give all sorts of names, dude. Like I'm literally letting you name a technology, a new one, until you know the original name, of course. But okay, so I guess I'll move ahead. You guys can keep putting the stuff there. We'll look at that later again. So this technology, and it's not, it's somewhat an anticlimax. It's just called twistronics. Like, the thing is just being twisted. So it's just called twistronics. And even I was kind of shocked about it, because I thought that, twistronics, when I started reading about it, it was somewhat like, the description was pretty complex and stuff. But when I tried to, make it easier for you guys to understand stuff, when I came through this article, it just made it so simple, and then it just clicked. Okay, twistronics was just about, a subtle angle between two things, and now people are trying to twist a lot of different things to figure out what new can they come up with. So that's about twistronics. Now let's move on to the next technology. Okay, so the next technology is going to be edge computing. Now, I won't expect a lot of you to know what an edge is exactly and stuff like that. So that's why you have to bear with me through the whole video so that you guys get an idea of what we're talking about.
Computing is
exactly what it's.
One second. Yeah. So let's just watch this video and hopefully you'll be clear with edge computing and what it is after this.
Sounds like computing that takes place at the edge. It matters. Edge computing is exactly what it sounds like. Computing that takes place at the edge of corporate networks, with the edge defined as the place where end devices access the rest of the network. Things like phones, laptops, industrial robots, and sensors. The edge used to be a place where these devices connected so they could deliver data to and receive instructions and download software updates from a centrally located data center or the cloud. Now, with the explosion of the Internet of Things, that model has shortcomings. IoT devices gather so much.
So hopefully you guys are aware about the cloud structure where basically each device connects to the central servers where most of the computation takes place. Now what they're talking about here is that initially it was just a few laptops and computers and routers, but now it's since the advent of IoT, basically there are a lot of devices coming up, and the cloud is not the best way to handle all of them. So let's see what Edge is doing exactly.
Data that the sheer volume requires larger and more expensive connections to data centers and the cloud. The nature of the work performed by these IoT devices is also creating a need for much faster connections between the data center or cloud and the devices. For example, if sensors and valves at a petroleum refinery detect dangerously high pressure in the pipes, shutoffs must be triggered as soon as possible. With analysis of that pressure data taking place at distant processing centers, the automatic shutoff instructions may come too late. But with processing power placed local to the end devices, latency is less, and that round-trip time can be significant.
So as you can see that they are bringing the processing power from the cloud, which could be as far as maybe the pipe is in India and the cloud system is in America, stuff like that. So they're bringing the processing power closer to the system, and they're basically talking about sending only the required parts to the cloud rather than sending all sorts of small things there.
Reduced, potentially saving downtime, damaging the property, and even lives. Even with the introduction of edge devices that provide local computing and storage, there will still be a need to connect them to data centers, whether they are on premises or in the cloud. For example, temperature and humidity sensors in agricultural fields gather valuable data, but that data doesn't have to be analyzed or stored in real time. Edge devices can collect, sort, and perform preliminary analysis of the data, then send it along to wherever it needs to go.
So I'm sure a lot of you are doing machine learning right now. If you guys are not, if you actually start working on pretty complex models and stuff, you'll realize that the computation takes a lot of time and, hell lot of time for it to complete, and, basically it takes a lot of computation power. So what they're talking about here is that suppose if you have some IoT devices on a farm, they could do some preliminary, basic computations on that data, and then send it to the cloud for it to, be processed faster and stuff. Because in the cloud, what happens is that, the RAMs and stuff is way too high because it's owned by all sorts of big corporations. And basically the bigger processing can happen faster there, but do a small chunk of it near the system, near the local place itself, so that the entire process becomes error free. So I guess this is more about edge computing, and I wouldn't like to go further into this because this is like some sort of an advanced concept for you guys. But I just wanted to give you an idea that, cloud computing is not the end. Like, I think, I'm not sure, I don't remember, but I think some of you might have mentioned cloud computing in the initial, the word cloud, which we made. So cloud computing right now is actually kind of old. Like this might sound weird to you, but it's really not the latest thing. Now, a lot of things are being built upon cloud computing as well. So this is one of the things, and there are even things which are being told against edge computing as well. So there are applications of everything, and whichever of these technologies you might find interesting, you can definitely go and look out for them later in your college life, or even right now. Once you're done with this, you can try Googling them out. So I guess let's move to the next slide. One second. Yeah. So let's move on to the next part of our webinar. Let's push on to computer science and let's see what's up here. So the first thing which I'm going to be talking about is some sort of a mixture of computer science and electronics. So as you can see, this is what's the Project Solai. What she's doing here is basically she's using gestures to control the UI of any sort of an like a device such as a phone or as a laptop. You can basically use gestures to do that. Now, again, I want you guys to watch a short clip of a video which will kind of give you an idea of what am I talking about exactly.
The radar has a properties which no other technology has. It can work through materials, can embed it into objects. It allows to track really precise motions. And what is most exciting about it is that you can shrink the entire radar and put it in a tiny chip. That's what makes this approach so promising. It's extremely reliable. There's nothing to break. There's no moving parts. There's no lenses. There's nothing. Just a piece of sand on your board.
Now we're at a point where we have the hardware where we can sense these interactions and we can put them to work. We can explore how well they work and how well they might work in products.
Blows your mind usually when you see things people do. That's what I'm really looking forward to. I'm really looking forward to releasing this to the development community. And I really want them to be excited and motivated to do something cool with it, right?
So as Swarupa had asked, this is what is Project Solai about. It's Google's Project Solai base. It's called Google Project Solai because they've been working on it for quite a while now. And they have, initially it was sort of a bulky thing to be looking at, but now they have compressed it into a small chip, which basically, there are these 3 steps which it looks at. It basically emits some radiation. And as your hand moves through that, it constantly emits this radiation. As your hand moves through it, some of it is reflected back. And the way it's reflected back, it's recognized by the working inside the chip. Now, to make you guys understand how this is kind of, segregated into different fields, as you can see that this is being captured as raw signal, the reflected rays, and the capturing and the Solai signal transformation, all this somewhat falls into electronics where, we're using components to, capture outside world make outside world observations. And what's happening inside is basically, this is the computer science part where we're using some sort of models, like basically it would be deep learning models, or for a simpler thing, it could be machine learning as well, but deep learning is what's the best for this. So they're using some sort of models to determine what sort of gesture you just made. Like it could be a wave, it could be a click, like you saw in the video. All of them could mean different things. But what this means for us is that in the near future, like right now, some of you might be doing courses on like app development and web development for front end, making different sorts of apps. So all that's pretty cool, but you should really keep a look on how the industry is changing. Because in the very near future, all this might just suddenly become redundant, and we might be using waves and other kind of gestures to be interacting with the UI. So this is one of the places where the UI itself is being revolutionized, and the way we might be using phones might change in the very near future. And by the way, I think in the Google Pixel 4, this has already been implemented as a sandbox. So if any of you own one, you can definitely go and check it out, download that, and basically try the few trial things which they have given in that to figure out how this works and stuff. So I guess let's move on to the next technology in computer science. Okay, so I saw some of you had mentioned IoT in the initial thing, the kind of a word cloud which we made. Now, what I'm basically doing here is I'm taking each of those things, like I kind of expected some of you to put that there, and I'm trying to show you what's the next step in those latest terms that you know. So like right now, recently we saw edge computing. So that was a step ahead in cloud computing. Now you must, I'm assuming most of you know about Internet of Things. Basically, it's about all the smart devices that you have. Like initially back in the day, the laptops and computers were what were just connected to the internet. Now we have all sorts of things getting connected to the internet. Could be from lights to speakers to smartwatches, anything. That's what IoT is about. But now IoT is generating a new field, or basically it's not exactly a field in itself, but it's some sort of a data collection, which is called as Internet of Behaviors. So let's see what this is about. Now I want you guys to be reading through this quickly. I mean, by the time I finish saying this, some of you might have already read this. So this is basically talking about how much data is going to be collected in the near future. So data collection is something which is, it's sort of inevitable, like, you can't really stop it or something. So some people really agree that, okay, it's a really bad thing and people are not really liking it, but we just have to go ahead this way and see what's the future bringing us in this sort of a way. So let's look at how this thing is working around. So this field is basically a combination of 3 fields within CS and some outside field as well. So IoT is more of ECE, as you guys might know. So that's the first part in this. Second part is data analytics. So let's see what this is. Basically, this is, you must have heard of data science, where people capture all sorts of data. Basically, they try to gather information about people or about any sorts of objects and make some sense out of that data. So data analytics is basically taking that data and analyzing it on all sorts of different ways to come up with some sort of conclusions and some sort of inferences from that data. Behavioral science is more on the psychology side, I would say. Basically study people and the way they work, kind of check the data with the actual science that's happening around. So these three fields getting combined together gives birth to IOB. Now, what I want you guys also to learn from this and the previous tech we discussed is that the real world technologies that you guys will be seeing in the near future won't really be a single field, which right now, and it'll be just about that. Most of the latest technologies are combinations of different fields, which you should be aware about. And it really helps if you have some basic ideas of about all of these fields. Like, basically don't go in too much into depth about all of these, but just have a basic, idea about what each of these is doing and exactly about and all stuff like that. So let's go ahead in IOB. So how could this be used? So this could be used in various ways. Like, basically there could be better effectiveness in testing of campaigns and products. So if they want, people are releasing some new products and basically some sort of advertisements, they could get better idea from your responses, basically data collected through various devices you have on you at that point of time to figure out whether that advertisement is working at that point, or, people are whether they feel like buying the product or not. Next, we go to, okay, so health monitoring to a new level. This could be, this point could be valid in a lot of ways, but I'll talk about in one particular way. Like, you can assume a scenario of a hospital where there's a patient and he's been given some smart devices to wear. And of course, the treatment has been going on, but a lot of times people talk about how the patient's mental health and the mood of the patient itself is pretty important in kind of determining how he's responding to the actual treatment. So this could actually help the doctors and the nurses figure out how is the mood of the patient and how is a particular treatment, like how's the patient feeling after a particular type of treatment. The next one. So now let's look at personalization at a never imagined scale. Now, as you could have, you might have already thought about this sort of a point from this itself, testing effectiveness, because everything is going to be up in the air about you, and the personalization in all sorts of ways. Like, if you're going to buy a product, people might, already know what kind of product you like and stuff like that. But let's look at it in a different way as well. Like right now, you might know that, most of us experience that, once we Google search something and, if our personalization of ads and stuff is on, we are being bombarded by all sorts of ads about that particular thing, right? The algorithms are smart enough to know what we are looking for, but they don't know when we want it exactly, or if we have bought it that we don't want it anymore. But once this sort of a technology has been implemented, the algorithms might even understand that, okay, once we have bought it, we don't want it anymore. Once we stop, the frequency of search has dropped. Maybe we are not interested anymore. Maybe, we might, like, it might also understand that we feel a bit threatened if we, they start suggesting things related to that search suddenly. So they might, start giving intervals between the suggestions. So all sorts of things are possible with that. And all this is not being thought by a person, like the point which I talked about right now. This will be decided by an algorithm. Like, that's how powerful IOB will be. Now let's look at the shortcomings, which a lot of us might have already thought about. The first one being it can make some illogical connections. So the article I was reading in about this, it talked about things like, if governments ever become advanced enough to use data like this, they might be using your Instagram likes to figure out if you're short tempered or something, to kind of give you a scale of how good of a driver you are. It's like you might feel that Instagram is a very personal space and you can do whatever you want there, but that might not be the case anymore, and you will be judged for everything you do online. So that would be a big shortcoming of this. The next one is, okay, so if a data leak occurs in this kind of a scenario, like entire population and people might be given away altogether, because their behavior, the way they behave in all sorts of situations, and the kind of data leaked would be much worse than what could happen right now. So the security would have to be ramped up by a lot if people would really want this to be working in an efficient way. And last but not the least, higher amount of control with the big companies. Like, of course, like, the big companies, they'll have a lot of control over our choices, and it's not like they already don't. But once this is implemented, they'll have even bigger, control on what we're going to do and, the way we're going to live. So that's something we should be aware about. And, we should be kind of given some sort of disclaimers once this sort of thing is implemented. And also, yeah, I wanted to make sure that this IOB is not like a term which will come on us one day and, it will come in the news. Okay, from today, IOB is going to start and, just be ready for it. This is something which is going to be implemented very slowly. And, it's already started. I can say it's already started. So it will be gradually increasing as we go along the way. And IOB is just being given the term to the change that's going to be come in the near future. So this was somewhat, this was another technology which I wanted you guys to look at. And you guys can definitely go and Google more about this. And if you're more paranoid about your security and stuff, you can definitely start looking up about ways to make your things more secure and, have lesser digital footprints to kind of keep your data secure. So, okay, so let's, I guess, move on to the next technology now. Cool. So now let's look at blockchain. Now, okay, I just want a quick, again, let's get back to some interactions on the chat. I want a quick ping if any of you have heard of this on your, or, you have some basic idea of what it is about. You can just talk about it in the chat. If you have any idea, if you've heard the term, just say I've heard it. If you, you know about it, you can just say I know about it. Anything? Anyone? Cool. So Kiriti knows about Dogecoin and stuff. Nice. Oh yeah, Navya, that's pretty cool, right? Amazon uses it. Okay, it's used in cryptocurrencies. That's that. Okay, I'll reveal it to you. That's partly true, but that's true, but that's partly true. For supply chain management, that's another way of using it. Charvi, as you said, cryptocurrencies is a part of way of using it, and supply chain management, AWS, exactly. Yeah. Online wallets. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, online wallets is also a pretty good example of where you could use it. So nice. So some of you are really aware about this, and that makes me really happy because a lot of people, they've heard about the term, but the misconceptions around this term is a lot. So today, at least the 30 of you, I want you guys to be clear about this once you leave this session. And, you can maybe even clear your friends up if they're confused about this term and they're, mixing it up with other things. So let's look at blockchain exactly and figure out what it exactly is. So I'm sorry, the image is small over here, but bear with me through this. So now I wanted to look at these three different networks. And okay, I won't go into too much into depth about what networks are and stuff. Just, okay, I'll make it simpler. The dots over here, okay, in each of these, let's take an example of a bank and its customers, okay? Now look at this yellow graph here. Each of the central dot, the big dot is a bank here, and each of the other dots are the customers of the bank. Now, if you carefully notice, all of these nodes are connected to the central dot, right? All of them are connected to the central dot. Now, the problem with this is that suppose if the bank goes down or if the bank is hacked, all of these dots, their money can be, the money, the amount they own and all that could be jeopardized. And, they might not be owning any money after a sort of a big scale attack. So this is not the most secure way. And you might be surprised that this is how the world is working right now. Everyone's connected to a single bank and that's how there are multiple banks. Okay, this is not exactly how the world works. That's more of the second type. I don't think it's really clearly visible, but so each of these, as you can see, like this big dot here, there are multiple of these big dots and there's small people connected to each of them. So each of these multiple big dots are the multiple banks and people are connected to them. So now the first one is called a centralized network because all of the things are centralized to a single thing. This is a semi-decentralized, like it's somewhat decentralized, but there's still a lot of single nodes around and people are connected to most of them. So even if one of them gets hacked, a lot of people are affected. Now we come to something which is the basic basis of blockchains. So what this is about is, as you can see, there is no big node here, there's nothing like this big node over here in this entire network. Everyone is connected to each other. But what does that mean? So suppose if one person over here, suppose this dot, I hope you can see my cursor, this dot wants to transact some amount with the adjacent dot, and this is the channel they use. Now, a bank's job is when one person transfers some money to the other, the bank acts as a witness. Okay, I have your records and I'm going to cut $100 from your wallet and going to add $100 to his wallet. But the wallet's being controlled completely by the bank. But over here, what happens is the wallet's amounts is stored on each and every node on the network over here. Basically, each transaction is stored on each and every dot as you see over here. So if these two people are sending money, suppose this person is sending $100 to this person, most of the people here around would agree to become witnesses to this transaction and store that transaction's details on their system. Now the advantage over here is that since most of these people have a record of this transaction, even if one of them gets hacked or the system drops or whatever happens, there are a lot of other places where this information has been stored. Now that's what a blockchain in very simple terms is. Now let's go ahead. Now as you see over here, this is somewhat the more famous part of blockchains, cryptocurrencies. Now the dude who discovered blockchains and basically he discovered the cryptocurrency itself was Satoshi Nakamoto, and he's some sort of a mystery personality. No one still knows who that dude is. Like some people claim they know, but yeah, it's not pretty clear yet. So as you can see, these eyeballs, these are basically the people on the network with the systems, and these are all sorts of people who are storing information about various transactions. Now let me also give you about give you the information about how is the Bitcoin generated. So once two people are transacting, suppose the adjacent 5-6 people say, okay, we'll be witnesses. Now, what's the incentive for them to become witnesses? I mean, they're not jobless, right? They won't just come in and say, okay, I'll simply be a witness for a transaction. The algorithm which makes them the witness, and there's some work done by the algorithm. That algorithm generates something known as the Bitcoin, which is the cryptocurrency. By the way, I could be wrong in a lot of ways over here, but I'm trying to explain it in very simple terms to you guys. So that's how a Bitcoin is generated. Once a transaction is made, people have witnessed it. The people who witnessed it, they get some Bitcoin as a reward of some sort for witnessing this transaction here and kind of keeping a record of it. This makes the whole system foolproof to a lot of sense. And it's much better than a centralized system, which we saw over here, which related to some sort of a single bank for the whole world. So that's what a Bitcoin is. And that's what basically blockchain is in a very simple terms. So hopefully the thing is more clear for you guys, and if someone else asks you about it, you might be able to explain it to them. So let's move ahead to the next technology.
Hi,
yeah.
Again, I have a question. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, guys, any questions, please ask.
Yeah, what is it? Bitcoin mining? Is there something?
Yeah, exactly. So Bitcoin mining, the things are, the mining word is basically something which has been it's been given to abstract, basically make the whole process more abstract. But what it technically is that suppose if some person wants to basically come on a network where transactions are happening, once you join that network and the transaction happens, you get the Bitcoin, you have mined it. So that's basically in the gist of what Bitcoin mining is happening. And also one more thing is that I'm not sure how many of you are aware, and even I'm not completely sure about the number, but Bitcoins are technically to a limited extent. I mean, there are only about, I think, 22 million or something like that Bitcoins, which can be mined. And that is basically being ensured by the algorithm. So once that number is hit, we can't mine any more Bitcoins. And the only thing we can do is basically, give it to each other and stuff like that. So once that happens, this is basically right now, I think we are about at the 20 mark and the max is 22. So we have almost exhausted the Bitcoin reserve. But anyways, I mean, don't worry, like Bitcoin is not the only cryptocurrency. There are tons of them out there now. And the reason why there are multiple cryptocurrencies is because Bitcoin was a pretty cool new idea, but there were some flaws in it, of course, as usual, as everything has flaws. So a lot of different things came, like Ethereum is another one which basically builds upon Bitcoin and has some more security features and stuff like that. So there are a lot of different things you can figure out. And even I'm kind of still a very introductory at a very introductory phase in this, and I'm still reading books and stuff about this. So I guess if any of you are interested about this, you can definitely start researching about this field, as this is one of the things which are definitely going to boom up in the near future. And as you can see, Elon Musk is routing for it. So I mean, of course, this thing has to be the future, right? So cool. So let's move on to the next segment of our webinar, which is going to be mechanics and mechatronics. So let's see. And I hope you guys find this table interesting. I mean, if you can figure out how this is working, tell me as well, because I'm not really that good at mechanics and the physics part. Even 11th and 12th, I wasn't really great at it. So I just put the picture here for any of you who could figure out how this thing is holding up. It'll be great. We can discuss it after the session. So okay, let's go ahead. So now let's come to autonomous vehicles, and this is more into the mechatronics part, and basically combining all sorts of technology which we know till now. And as you guys can see that the more complex technologies, I mean, of course, you guys must know that autonomous vehicles are one of the most complex technologies we have right now. So the thing you must notice is that as we get into more complex technologies, things from all different sorts of fields should come into the picture and basically combine together. That's how a lot of complex stuff is made. And even if you are planning to come up with some sort of new technologies, my best advice to you would be to basically learn about as many different kind of fields as you can, and then try to combine them to see what can you brew up with that good brain of yours. So let's kind of bring our focus back to autonomous vehicles. Now, this is the technical part, which I guess you guys might be reading and stuff. You can go through this as I'm talking about this, because I won't be explaining all of this one by one. But yeah, and if you're interested, you can read this while I'm talking about it. So I'm going to be focusing at the picture over here. As you can see, all of these vehicles are connected to some sort of a local network. So let's take an example of Bangalore itself. Suppose some people are there in Koramangala, and take this good scenario where everything is proper in India, and we have all sorts of autonomous vehicles on the roads. So these vehicles are connected to a local area network of that particular place basically, and how that helps them is basically that syncs all the vehicles itself. So like right now, let's try to take an analogy. Like suppose you have your phone, your laptop, and your watch, right? And some people might even have an iPad and tablets and stuff. Now, a lot of us prefer them to be completely synchronized. Like okay, suppose we open a tab in our phone, we just want to throw it into our laptop. We want that sync there. We want that sync from our tablet to our laptop to phone and stuff like that, right? That makes the job pretty easier for us. Now, the people, they want to bring that concept into vehicles. How would that help? That would help basically in the way that suppose if two vehicles are pretty close, they know about their locations and they have all sorts of data about each other. They might have data about each other's speed, each other's direction, each other's acceleration. And we as humans, we are great at driving stuff with just 2 or 3 senses that we use. But the data that these guys are going to be using once they're on the roads is going to be crazy. I mean, a human can't even dream about the kind of ways they'll be thinking about to drive on a simple straight road. So at right now, I mean, it's on a very basic experimental level and how the things are running and stuff. And I mean, even Elon Musk is being made fun of because coming to Indian roads, Tesla autopilot might not really work out that well. But of course, I mean, once the roads and stuff are really good, and once we start making things this way, a lot of experts have cleared up that this is going to be a much safer world in terms of driving and in all sorts of ways. So that's more about autonomous vehicles, and I'm not going too much into depth in this because I'm pretty sure a lot of you are aware about this. So let's just go on to the next technology. Cool. So this is another project by Google. Okay, not exactly Google, but a company which is a sister to Google, and it's under Alphabet, which is called as the X company. Now, the X company is basically the company which comes up with a lot of latest technologies and a lot of cutting edge things which we might like start using in the near future. So I'm going to take up the everyday robot project of theirs and kind of show it to you guys. So what they're doing in this is basically they're teaching robots to work in a highly changeable environments. Now you might be aware that right now the scene is that robots are basically like they are in sale, but they do very basic jobs. Like if you bring a sweeper robot, he can just pretty much sweep the floor, right? I mean, you can't expect him to climb up walls and start dusting places which weren't accessible by you. But what these guys are trying to do is they're trying to make universal robots which start learning about a particular environment the more they are in it. So like suppose there's an office space and a lot of things, the things are very dynamic there, right? Like suppose you have a mug there and then you remove the mug and you keep it somewhere else and things are pretty misplaced here and there. So the robot starts to learn the dynamics of the place itself. Like, I mean, you guys must be aware of machine learning and stuff, right? So that's how, so basically you might be teaching your models to learn about images and basically identify objects in that. But what these robots are doing is they're identifying various sorts of movements of multiple objects around them and learn their movement itself. So once they end up learning that, they can actually start helping in arranging things back to their original places. And basically they'll start learning all sorts of different work required for the place itself without us having to, change the way, basically hard code things into them. Instead of hard coding, they'll start learning things themselves. Like it could be some sort of a toddler, but instead of a toddler, it's a robot who's learning new things by seeing them. Now, as of now, what the general consensus was that if it's a robot, just hard code it with all sorts of things and it will do that work for you. But what the X company discovered was that teaching a robot and letting it learn through machine learning and basically work its way around machine learning is much more effective and better than hard coding it and making it work around. So that's the thing that those guys discovered, and they started working pretty hard on it. Now, this line I took from one of their articles, and this is the vision which they are working with, that to see if we can make robots as helpful to people in the physical world as computers are now in the virtual world. So this is a very heavy statement technically because computers are basically the gateways to the internet. but these guys are trying to make robots also integrated into our physical lives. So we don't know to what extent these guys will be successful, but you should definitely go and check out the project because they're doing some really cool stuff with it. And if you're interested in robotics, this could really be a treat for you to watch. So let's move on to our last but not the least technology for the day, which is called generative design. Now, this is also an amalgamation of AI and pure mechanics. So let's see what this is about. Now, I've put up some pictures here. And if any of you are aware of like if any of you are into mechanics and stuff, and in 11th and 12th, if you remember all the basics and all that, basically the thing was that we kind of have these specific design structures which are basically give some sort of extra stability to things. Like if you I recently learned about trusses and stuff after joining college, but some people knew them from before through all these NASA things and all. But what a truss was basically that it's some sort of a triangular structure which gives support to things. But after all the human design things, right? Now what we're doing is that again we're taking a model and we are letting it learn all sorts of things about this structure. So we're letting it learn about the components of basically the things used to build this, the use case about where we're going to put it, all sorts of pressures and stuff which is going to face. And once that's done, we are letting it create its own model of the same thing to do the same purpose, but in a different way. So you can see the difference between this and this. Now you might be wondering that what's the big deal? I mean, okay, we have fewer rods here and we have more web-like things over here. But the thing is that to come up with this particular design, it's technically impossible for a human because the things that this model has considered to make this are way beyond our level of comprehension. Like basically, if you see this one line from here to here itself, it would have calculated the best possible probability for this line to be anywhere on this rod, and it found that this was the best place. So it did that for all of these small things, and that's how it came up with this. So quite obviously, as you can imagine, this would have much better, also it would be much better in its use case than a simple design thing by humans. And this can be used, these models can be used to design all sorts of things. Like, you can see this could be a structure of a new car. This could be the support of a back wheel of a bike. This could be the car wheels rim inside, basically. So all of these might look little weird to us, or somewhat it might seem that there's a lot of redundant things here and there. Why all this just simple 4 rods you can put, all basically the original thing that was there. But the model has designed this with a lot of parameters in picture, which you could even choose to keep. Like you could keep cost, you could keep all sorts of durability, you could keep strength, all sorts of models, and all sorts of parameters are taken into the picture while designing these things. And once that's done, the model comes up with the best possible solution for that problem. And once it does, people actually compare that with the human counterparts, and in most of the cases, the one designed by AI is much better. So that's about it for the day, I guess. This was the last technology I wanted to talk about.